Hello, Matheus. Welcome to the show. So happy to have you on today.
Hi, Moshe. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. Can you tell us what is Tint and who do you serve?
Tint is an embedded insurance platform. So we help companies create protection products that would protect their customers from risks they are intrinsic to their core business. For example, we work with a company called uShip, and you can ship anything through their website, like a car, a motorcycle, a couch. And as you imagine, like in ship, things may break while they are in transit. So we help uShip. We power their shipping protection product, so if anything were to break or go wrong, the customers are protected. So that typically helps the company increase the value of their core offering while creating a profit center.
Interesting. So companies that have that intrinsic risk, they can use your platform to offer insurance to the customer and either build it into their product offering um, natively or offer it as an add-on. So that, as you mentioned, a profit center. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Like this, today, one of the biggest trends, if not the biggest trends in insurance, is this idea of the embedded insurance, right? Is it the idea that the brands you love, the products you use, will become your insurance companies or would sell you the insurance you need because they are better positioned and customers don't necessarily care about insurance. They don't want to have to download a different app or have to call anybody to get insurance. If they can get that through the product and services they love, it's a much better experience. And we are the infrastructure that power that transformation.
Very interesting. So I think we're all familiar with the idea of buying insurance when you ship something, right? You go to the post office, you can pay extra to get insurance on that delivery. What other categories? I know that you work with marketplaces a lot. Can you speak to a few other use cases that really leverage this type of product?
Yeah, marketplaces in general, regardless of what they do, are a great example. So my background, I came from Turo, which is one of the leading or the leading peer-to-peer car sharing marketplace. And we built all of this inside Turo, and that's what was our inspiration really to start Tint. But we work with customers like Neighbor, which is a storage marketplace. So think about Airbnb for storage. We work with Ridershare, which is Airbnb for motorcycles. So we also work with Baby Quip, which is an equipment sharing for baby stuff. So you can rent a stroller, rent a car seat in a different city when you're traveling. So because of our background and because of the nature of marketplaces, we have a number of marketplaces as our customers.
So if I'm a PM or a founder at a startup that is, let's say, in the marketplace business, there's inherent risk in any time that you're facilitating a transaction between two people, right? There, each of them has risk, and then the company is bearing some of that risk. So, how do I go about thinking through what a solution should look like for us as a business? Where should I pass the cost along to the consumer, and what does that process look like as the startup or the marketplace, the platform partnering with Tint?
Yeah, there's typically a collaboration that happens between those companies and the providers, right? Like Tint being one of them, but who's going to be your partner? Because that's exactly kind of what we do. So those marketplaces, they contact us. We go through the sales process. We will provide some advice and guidance and like what are the options, what are the colors they can choose from, the sizes, the flavors of this program, and help like based on their unique characteristics choose what's best for them. Then we agree on what is the solution and we go execute. And then we think is the technology and the services that will be behind the scene part like powering those protection products. So when a customer goes on say uShip's website, they just click I want to add protection. Tint is behind the scenes powering everything, but the customer still experience it as if it was coming from uShip. And I think for us this is mission critical because again, we want the consumers to get the protection from the brands and products they love directly. But those companies don't want to have to do all the work behind the scenes. So that's why we exist.
So Tint is the Insurtech platform that powers all of that on the front end for the consumer, but also on the back end for, let's say, uShip. If there is a claim, all of that system is running through Tint, right? Are you guys also doing the underwriting, or are you a marketplace on your own side where you're just connecting insurers or reinsurers with those companies that are looking to offer that?
Yeah, we typically have a product in a modular way. So we will play the roles that our customers want us to play. So you mentioned claims. I think underwriting is another one. We are not an insurance company, so we don't take risks on our balance sheet. So we will work with partners whenever they want. But what we're seeing is that like some of our customers decide to hold all the risk in their own balance sheet because this can become, depending on the conditions, so profitable that the companies don't even want to use an external insurer. They would retain everything themselves. So again, we see ourselves as the infrastructure, the modular kind of or the modular infrastructure that will give them the options, and then we will work with them and guide them through the journey so they can pick and choose what is best for them.
Got it. Do I as so again as the founder or um, uh, GM, PM, whoever is responsible for standing up this program um, at the the platform or the marketplace, am I first going to Tint and then you're going to talk through some of the options around who should be underwriting this risk? Or do I start with, let me find an insurance partner that will underwrite this, and then Tint will facilitate that from a technology and implementation standpoint?
Yeah, you typically should talk with Tint first because we'll help you find the underwriter, find a way to transfer the risk out as part of the solutions we provide.
Okay, very cool. So, you mentioned your background in Turo. I have almost rented from Turo a couple of times, and I'll tell you my experience, and it's very relevant to this conversation. Is I uh, was looking for a rental car, some airport, wherever it was. I saw some prices from the traditional rental car companies, and then I was like, you know what? Let me check out Turo. Turo was equally the price was comparable in terms of the rental cost. But then I get to the last stage of checkout, and it says, oh wait, you need to add insurance on. And as someone who has regular car insurance, which usually covers rental cars, I also have those travel credit cards that cover rental cars, but they specifically excluded uh, Turo, at least at the time. I don't know if they've changed since. Um, and then because I needed to buy insurance on top of the rental with Turo, it came out to be a lot more than a traditional rental car company. So why is that the case? Is that just a matter of um, the insurance companies like Geico or Progressive or whoever don't aren't ready to adopt the Turo model, and eventually it will happen? Or is there a different risk class for them to extend their coverage to somebody like a marketplace like Turo versus an enterprise or a Hertz or whoever?
I believe it's just the nature of insurance industry, and it takes a long time for a change to happen. So you mentioned the car rental model; they have been doing that for decades at this point, so they understand. I'm pretty sure when the first car rental came, people were looking like this is a crazy idea. Why would you rent a car? And then they had to figure it out, but eventually they did. What's interesting, like Turo, because we mentioned is a slightly different model. It's inherently the same risk, right? Like an individual driving a car that belongs to somebody else. But it's different enough from car rental that Turo had to create an entire category to exist. So the legend says that the two founders of Turo talked with insurance companies for 18 months before he could get an insurance policy to start the business. So think about it as a founder. You have the idea, you have MVPs, you have customers who wanted to do it. You cannot launch until 18 months down the road. Otherwise, you'll be doing that illegally. So it is an example of like when how the insurance industry on average is not very fast to react to innovation. And frankly, they don't have a lot of incentives, right? Turo now is a multi-billion dollar business. And a lot of insurers did change their policies to fit Turo. But back then, when Turo was a small startup, like they don't want to spend time right thinking about that. They have their traditional models and they stick to that. And that's why like insurance is a place where there's so many startups coming and disrupting because the incumbents, they are now on average very low, and they don't necessarily have incentives to adapt to the changes in the world.
So it's just a matter of the status quo taking a while to change for the new innovators or disruptors that are coming to the space.
That's right, and I think like again, you can look at it different ways. That's the problem that you mentioned, but there's also the opportunity, and that's what Turo did, right? Like Turo now runs most of its insurance stack in-house because it has so much data, so much insights about all the risks. They have a lot more data than or granular data than a traditional insurance company would. That they became the best in the world in peer-to-peer car share insurance, and now have like they may process like, you know, I would imagine hundreds of millions of dollars of that kind of risk. So that's a little bit of like an inspiration for what we're doing. Like there's so many tech platforms out there in many innovative use cases, and they are all facing similar challenges. Like the incumbents don't understand their business, or they don't want to understand, and they are taking the matter with their own hands, working with, you know, Insurtech's innovative partners. They are more open to those changes.
Interesting. Let's stay on the car insurance topic for just another second, because I'm curious how the insurance is priced into those transactions. For the most part, I don't know if Turo does this, but car insurance, I'm sorry, car rental insurance is a flat rate. So they have like this cutoff of under 25 or over 25. So obviously there's a higher risk below that, but it's like this, you know, if you're 24 and 364 days, you're paying X rate, and then a day later you're paying Y rate. But other than that, they're not really pricing the risk into your insurance. They're blending it across. As opposed to car insurance, obviously you get a quote. It's based on you, your driving history, your zip code, a few additional factors, maybe not as many factors as they could leverage, whether you're talking about like social media data and other data that is probably very useful in predicting risk. So why is that the case in car rental insurance? Is that the typical model for most companies that are using a platform like Tint to offer embedded insurance? Are they blending the risk across all of their customers to offer a flat rate, or is it kind of unique to the individual use case, user, location, etc.?
It's I would say it's a strategic decision for the car rental, but I would say is related to lack of capabilities, right? So until very recently, you would go think about even before the internet, you go to a kiosk, show your driver license, your credit card, and you get a car. So that interaction didn't generate a lot of data, right? They wouldn't know your date of birth because it's in a driver license, and that's it. Um, and and imagine now Turo on kind of the other extreme, like many years later, like Turo will know who is the renter. You have a lot of characteristics about you, all the information about the car, the zip codes. This is all digital. It is all part of the transaction, and it could be leveraging milliseconds to figure out a pricing for you, right? So the car rentals, as anybody who works in insurance, understand the idea of risk-based pricing, which is like price shouldn't be the same for everyone. If price is the same for everyone, inevitably the higher risk use cases are being subsidized, and the good use cases are paying more than they should. Right? Like it's just math. So, but then they don't have the capabilities to actually make sense and have something um, more granular than that. So what they do, they charge extremely high price from everyone because they know it's not going to convert all the time, but whenever it does, it's highly profitable for them. So that's what they did, and I think you can look across the same problem across many use cases. When you have incumbents, they have very unsophisticated risk pricing and model, or sometimes one price fits all. But all the kind of the new breed of technology companies, they're generating so much data that they won't do the same. They will have a much more robust way of pricing and use, you know, 5, 10, hundreds of factors depending on the use case, and that is a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I find it interesting that companies will leverage dynamic pricing from a top line perspective. So, the famous example of people searching for airline tickets on a Mac versus a PC, and they're showing different prices, right? A lot of people recommend that whenever you're looking for airline pricing, to go into incognito mode, where you may actually see the cheapest pricing. So, they're leveraging data from that perspective to potentially charge more for people who they think would pay more. But they're not necessarily using it on the bottom line from a cost perspective of, should we charge more because this customer can cost us more in terms of margin or risk?
Yeah, and no, it makes sense, right? So again, one of the reasons why we exist is that this trend is common. company tends to develop or deploy a lot more of their resources and technology, even tech companies, on the top line, optimization of top line, than on the kind of cost or operations side of the house. Right. One of common frustration we had at Turo was that sometimes we had great ideas on the risk stack, but those wouldn't get prioritized versus a search optimization, like things that you're mentioning. Again, not saying there's a right and wrong, and it's very rational that the companies make this decision, but that's a common problem. So that's why, on our side, we built a lot of this technology uh, for pricing optimization, A/B testing, things like that. The same as you would imagine from top line pricing, because we knew our customers wouldn't build themselves, and they shouldn't really, because they have their core business already demanding 100% of their kind of product stack, right? So, yeah, I think this is very common, and we've seen that across many use cases.
Yeah. As a marketer, I think we're guilty of pushing top line growth and focusing on that and not looking at overall profitability. Do you think it's also VCs that are driving that culturally, that top line growth is what matters, and that's where they're pushing startups to focus?
I think it does influence. I think it's a combination, right? Because again, the game that everybody was playing until last year was a very different game, which was a game of growth of all costs. Which, to your point, top line is the only thing that matters. I think, and VCs, they're not necessarily guilty of it, but they also playing that game, and their startups are being compared. The IPOs were being compared based on top line growth. So it's a very rational approach to optimize top line growth. I think after last year, with everybody, I'd say realize, or at least return to growth, but not at all costs, right? Growth with profitability, with this idea that, like, yeah, it doesn't matter if you grow 10x, but you have a very unsustainable business model. Sooner or later, the bill will come, and your company is gonna go under, right? Or is gonna have a massive valuation haircut. Like, then that wasn't the case, right, until last year. So I wouldn't say it's not the marketers, it's not the VCs. It's really like, what's the game? Like, what is the company as a whole trying to optimize? And that has changed.
And you're seeing that changing with your customers focusing more on the bottom line and profitability.
Yes, we have, right, and I think we, as a, I don't know, as a founder and CEO, I think about those things all the time as well, and like, and we change how we run our company, and we definitely see our customers doing the same.
Mhm. So let me take that a step further. As a consumer, almost every purchase that I make or transaction has a part of the cost is paying for risk, right? So when I pay for um, Uber ride, my that whatever risk insurance is built into that price, right? When I order something from Amazon, part of that cost is the likelihood that somebody may steal it off of my porch, or that I would say that somebody stole it off my porch and file a claim, or that I'll return it, or all of those risks are built into the cost. What do you think it would take for us to go to a model where each person has their own risk score and that's shared across platforms? So I take my risk score from Uber to Airbnb to Amazon to everywhere else. And if I'm somebody who files a lot of claims and lives in a dangerous neighborhood or whatever the risk factors are, then maybe I'm paying more across the board. And vice versa, if I live way out in the rural area, nobody's stealing anything off my porch. There's very few car accidents, etc. My costs or my price is lower on all the platforms. Is that possible?
So I think there are two things there. So having, they'll say, let's get a Amazon, for example, like Amazon charging you different prices based on your risk, or charging you a surcharge if you are in a very dangerous area, whatever. That can and should already happen, and everything is in place for Amazon or others to do that. Technology is absolutely there, right? Or they could even like strip out that protection and say, from now on, I'm not gonna cover that, and but here's another $2 that you could pay for that protection. Meaning, to your point, like right now, if they don't do that, that is socialized. Everybody's paying for that, and paying the same price, right? Um, So this first part already kind of easy. Or when you look at company by company, they can already do that today. Now, how can we get to a world where we're going to start seeing things across companies when they know not only your risk at Amazon of theft, but they know that probably your car is more a danger if you're in a zip code that has a lot more crime. And then how do they know that you kind of cancel 10 Uber rides in the last week? Like all those behavior things, that I think is a lot harder. And I heard this idea for the first time 10 years ago, and it's not here yet. So it's been very hard. Ironically, the closest of this implementation I've seen is what China did, right, for the social score, which is like the crazy extreme version of that. But it is kind of similar, right? It's the idea that you're going to get rewarded or punished as your behavior across your life in many different things. So that I think it's the holy grail from risk scoring, but I believe it's going to be very hard in a fragmented capitalistic society that we have today.
Yeah, I was thinking about the China example. Obviously, that's not an outcome that we want here in the U.S. I don't think, but I guess everything has uh, benefits and risks associated with it, right?
Yes. Yes, and I think I agree. That's why in many ways it hasn't happened, right? In a market driven economy. I bet one of the pushback that those folks working on this idea had over time is that people just don't want that kind of thing.
Yeah, but right, but you are seeing people, companies pass along those costs more frequently. So, for example, now when you're booking a hotel or a car rental, you can pay a different price whether you want to, lock in, whether you want to have free cancellation or not. Right. So
Yeah.
you're paying for that added cost. You talked about insurance, optional insurance on a product if you're shipping something, or whatever it is, that's an add-on, and they're passing along those costs to the consumer. So maybe consumer, it's just a consumer behavior thing that people will in time start to um, unbundle some of those costs and start accepting what they're um, willing to pay for it directly. Although I think consumers generally underprice risk or undervalue risk. So I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. Let's talk about growth. I'd love to know how Tint started in the early days. How did you go about getting your first customers? This isn't a product that you can really MVP. There's a lot of moving parts here from a technology as well as from a compliance, legal, regulatory standpoint. Um, I'm always fascinated by these kind of middleware products that are under the hood, powering transactions between other parties, between marketplaces. Had fascinating conversation with the founder of Treasury Prime a few weeks ago. Similar in the financial space, right? Empowering connection between banks and fintechs. Um, as a consumer, you would never know what's happening under the hood, but it takes a lot for Tint to facilitate that. So, how did you do that in the beginning? Thinking about, hey, we need to get to product market fit. Um, how are we going to test that? How are we going to build an MVP to whatever that means in your business?
So the strategy we use, like we recognize that you're absolutely right that the end-to-end infrastructure we're building has many modules and they are not necessarily easy, right? It's quite the opposite. So I think we recognize that early. So what we've done is like we started let's try to isolate one and try to kind of sell, get traction based on that one while we are in the road of building the entire module. So if you think about a car analogy, we focus on first trying to build the engine and selling the engine to other companies that could kind of build the rest of the car before we could have the entire car and say, okay, now it's turnkey. You just need to drive, right? So making like what we did is like our first product was an AI powered score that predict risk of the claim. So very similar to what we had built at Turo. So again, going back to all those factors, like Turo can predict with a decent probability, like what is the like what or with decent sorry confidence, what is the probability that that transaction is going to get into an accident and how much it would cost if it does. So the first thing we've done is like just getting this product, and we start working with companies like Outdoorsy And that's all we did. We powered that piece of their insurance stack. But from there, we build all the other capabilities that can not only kind of risk score the transaction or the core underwriting engine, but how to have a policy admin, claims management, like how to handle claims, how the licenses required to sell. So we built all of that, but we had already some kind of strong evidence of product market fit of like the customers want to do that even with our first product. So we learned that our first product wasn't enough to get us to scale a VC backed company, but we saw there was a good step in the journey, and then we kind of like kept selling and kept building and trying to get the close to the end as we could.
Did you have that end-to-end product vision from the beginning, or was it incremental as you built, you realized that there's more opportunity in the next part of that full stack?
We had the product vision. We didn't know how far would we need to go, right? So the first hypothesis, like maybe this engine by itself, it's enough. Then we're like, no, like we're hearing from the customers, like, sure, but I don't know how to build the rest of the car. Most of the customers, right? And they're like, okay, so we need to keep going. But then from there, like, do we need to be the agent? Do we need to have broker licenses? Like, those are all things that we built after we had customer demand for it that we didn't know or didn't anticipate that we would need. So long as I say there was like general direction, but exactly how we would connect dot to dot, like that, we didn't know. That came from customer feedback, from conversation with prospects for features we need to promise to close a deal. Which is like, it's, I would say, is dangerous in a way because you may end up with a bunch of things that don't connect. But in our case, luckily they were close enough, and then over time we could look at like all of those things. Which ones should we carry forward? Which ones are we okay deprioritizing? Kind of, it became clearer what was the path as we were going. But frankly, we didn't know step by step when we started.
Got it. Those first customers, you mentioned Outdoorsy as one of them. Was that just knocking on doors, cold calling? Was that personal network? Did you run any growth experiments at those early stages? How did you get those first customers?
So for us was a lot of personal network. So, and this thing I think I strongly recommend for founders, especially enterprise founder, B2B founders, is that like you should absolutely try to leverage your personal network for your first few customers, because when you don't have a product, you're selling yourself, you're selling your expertise. Like people, you're looking for people who trust you, or trust you to solve some problems they have. And that's exactly what we did. Like our most of our early customers were related to the marketplaces, but sharing economy and vehicle sharing, because it's what we knew at Turo, right? So those are folks we had met. Like the Outdoorsy specifically, the person who hired us at Outdoorsy was a former Turo colleague who went from Turo to Outdoorsy. So I believe that in these early days, that it's mission critical to have a network. And if as a founder you don't have, I suggest you build it before you jump, right? Because you will need that. So like work for a company for 1 to 4 years, and then eventually you build a network. I worked for 4 years at Turo, and then that really increases the chance of success for your startup down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Aside from those personal connections and the network you built at Turo, how valuable was your Y Combinator network? And in general, what were your takeaways from participating in that program?
So YC, we joined YC about 3 years after we were founded. So we had gone through like the beginning try and error phase. By the time we were at YC, we had already seen the beginning of inflection point. So YC was like exactly what they promised. They were an acceleration of our company. So we quickly could double or triple the number of customers 1 or 2 months into YC. So it was very beneficial to us. I'm a strong believer in the model. I think despite having a business school background, having had a startup background, was still very useful, and I learned a lot about how to build companies. So I strongly recommend YC to any founder. But for us, it was an acceleration, right? So YC helped, and we were at a later stage than the average YC startup. We had, I think, over 250K or 300K ARR by the time we joined YC. And a lot of the other companies were just kind of on idea phase. So I really like how it accelerated us. And we continue to have like a lot of YC startups. They are our customers today.
So, with regards to YC, some have said that since they went remote after COVID or during COVID, and they've stuck with that model, um, it's somewhat diluted in terms of how many companies that are participating, and it's not the same as it was. Do you have any opinion on that? I don't know if you're seeing some of the companies that are coming out of there. Does it still carry the same weight and gravitas that it did when it was much smaller, much more selective?
I think it depends, right? I think there are some things that like does the general quality and the access to the network carry? Absolutely, right? So my batch was 100% remote, which was ironic. Like I lived in Mountain View, a mile away from the YC office, and it was remote. It was I couldn't actually go there. But I would say we still had access to founders of Airbnb, Stripe, Dropbox, like hearing their story, the PR version, and kind of really understanding the struggles. Talking with YC partners all the time, being part of the network, having access to the YC kind of thousands of startup network, that is all real and that continues regardless of Thursday night dinners. So I may be biased already because I haven't seen the in-person version, but I would say I didn't feel that remote was detrimental. And frankly, like being from Brazil, I believe like after remote happens, YC could reach out to a lot more startups globally. So even expand their footprint. They have a lot more startups from India, from Latin America, from Southeast Asia that they couldn't have as easily in a in-person event. So I think they all kind of continue to be the same. Now, if we're looking for is an exclusive club, then yes, there are more people, so there's less exclusive. But I would say I still believe that I believe in the YC mission of helping startups as great as many startups globally as they can, and then really leverage the asset they created, and remote really helps with that. And maybe if you ask Brian, the Airbnb folks that went through YC when they were 10 startups, they will feel differently. But in my batch, there were already 300 and plus, right? 350 or something. And I still got to know the whatever 10, 20 that were very relevant to me. And I will benefit from the network of the other 300 that I probably didn't meet in my batch.
Sure. And the benefit that you mentioned of from a B2B perspective of finding potential partners and customers expands as the selection expands, so that value has gone up. Um, let's go back to growth. We talked about the early stages. Since then, you've continued to grow. You've raised additional funding as well, a venture round. What growth channels today are most effective for you? What have you learned along the way with any growth experiments? What worked, what didn't work? If you can share, how you got to where you are today, and then what's coming up. Where do you see? Which channels do you see as being most important in the next few years as you continue to scale up?
Yeah, so we are at your point. We raised our Series A, so we're definitely on that phase now where we're like exploring with the different go-to-market models until we like the narrow down to one, two, three that we're going to scale in the future. So right now, like our core channel is direct sales. So we have our in-house our inside sales, right? We have a team. They go prospect. They go talk with customers. We handle all those relationships, and we are the only one selling Tint. Um, that works well, and I think that it's great because it's relatively low cost and it's high control. Like we're still getting a lot of feedback through those interactions. So getting the feedback firsthand, fast, control the relationship, it's mission critical, I would say, for a company our size. But we're also seeing that as we grow, we're likely to start deploying some indirect sales channels, such as like partnership with brokers, consultants, kind of other partners that could be representing and selling our product, especially as we get more maturity. Like we don't do a lot of paid marketing right now, like very little. Like again, we're we're not in a mass market where everybody's looking for embedded insurance every day that you have to go buy Google ads. Like we're definitely more on the relationship building. Content is a huge part of what we do. Trying to be helpful, educate the market, and that drives a lot more lead for us than say Google ads or Facebook ads or things like that.
You mentioned content, and I know that you've been on a number of podcasts, and I really appreciate you joining us today to share your experience and your knowledge in the space. What about from a awareness or marketing perspective? How has podcasting helped your business, or are you just doing it as a um, because personal interest, or just to share knowledge and not necessarily looking at it from a awareness standpoint for Tint?
I think for us is both. I mean, it does help Tint. We had many leads that came through people who saw podcasts. Even when we were like in interviews, and like you mentioned, you listened to a couple of them before. So like the message is out there. People are listening. They have access to a little bit more in depth how we think, our experience. So that definitely helps. So we're happy with this. But to me, it's like again more on a personal side. Like I really enjoy kind of sharing our story and helping other founders, right? To the extent that obviously we are early in our journey, but I think we are at the stage where there were a lot of lessons learned and a lot of things um, we've been through. And I very excited personally to share that and kind of helping more and more founders kind of get their business off the ground, having success. Like I'm a big believer that founders are superheroes, and I would love to help them as much as I can.
Very cool. Well, I definitely appreciate it. Let's talk about more on the B2C side and marketplaces specifically. You have a lot of experience there. You were leading international expansion at Turo. And of course, many of your customers today at Tint are these similar kind of marketplace type gig economy companies. What have you learned from growth perspective working at Turo and with your customers from a customer acquisition standpoint, building marketplaces, multi-sided marketplaces? Any lessons learned there that you care to share?
Yes, I mean it's a very different game than the one we play, right? It's a very interesting because again, I didn't have B2B experience before starting Tint. My all my experience had been on consumer, and a lot of it was Turo. So those companies that I think, yeah, they're definitely trying to address the what I think Andrew Chen from Andreessen Horowitz called the cold start problem, right? Like how do we everybody can understand the network effects and how things are great, like how you tap Uber, your car comes when there are enough drivers around. But like the problem is when you get started, like how do you figure it out? So I think a lot of the growth lessons and that I've seen and learned about marketplaces, like I related to how to do this code start problem from Turo. What I find the one insight that I think was very interesting, and I didn't have at the time, is that this code start problem also changes over time, right? So typically, the early days is about supply, because if you don't have in the critical mass of supply to get started, the renters won't come, right? The demand won't come. So you start with supply, you figure out the minimum, then the demand comes and you start growing demand. But at some point, demand is gonna grow fast, and then the problem is gonna go back to supply. So the marketers are thinking about the two sides and how to balance that, and the bottleneck keeps shifting. It never is just one side. I mean, assuming you can solve that kind of bottleneck, and then it goes to the other side. So there's definitely this kind of two-sided customer acquisition. Then you have to be running parallel with focus changing over time depending when you are um, in your journey, which is hard. Right?
Of course, yeah. The chicken and egg problem. Do you have separate marketing teams working on each side of the marketplace when you have, um, one looking at supply growth, the other one looking for demand growth, or do you kind of shift the team every 6 months or so as the pendulum swings?
I mean, the early days is probably one person doing both, but then should grow to your point specialization because the channels are going to be some of them are the same. Like Facebook and Google probably work for both, but there'll be a lot of like in the case of Turo, like car dealerships were a potential for good car supply, right? Like they have or airports, right? You have thousands of cars parked at airports at any time. Like, can you get that supply of car in the platform? And obviously, the demand team doesn't have to think about that. They have to think about how to compete with Avis and Enterprise, how to have you not like close your browsers and go rent an Enterprise because you thought that the pricing was a lot cheaper. So they have to do a lot more on pricing optimization, trying to figure out why it was at Houston at that time pricing was not competitive because Turo should be everything else being equal 50 to 30% cheaper than a comparable car rental. So either you get a BMW for the same price you get a Honda Civic, or if you want to get the Honda Civic, you get it to 30 to 50% cheaper. So what happened there in your experience? So the demand side, I think we look a lot more on that side of the house than the supply. So ideally they are separate.
Yeah. And, companies like Uber, of course, have invested heavily in very different strategies on growing um, driver adoption and the supply side, as well as the consumer demand side as well, with separate teams, separate strategies, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Um, Anything else that you learned doing international expansion? Of course, insurance is a very regulated product. So now with Tint, I don't know if you're expanding internationally just yet or focused on the US, but with Turo, you were dealing with those local regulations and local insurers, um, as well as different customer bases, right? Different cultural norms and uh, the consumer might be different market to market. So, what frameworks or ideas did you learn um, doing that on the international side that you can apply to Tint or that others can apply to their startup?
I mean, the main lesson I learned is that software is the easiest part of international expansion. And obviously, in Turo, in a business that has insurance, has operations, is it's a lot easier to build software than to manage a liquid, high quality, secure marketplace in a new country. So when I started, I approached the problem as almost like a product person. Like, yeah, sure, you enable a new country, you translate, like that's easy, relatively speaking. The much hard, like it took me a lot longer to get insurance and get operations up and running. And then obviously it changes a little bit depending on the marketplace. I was always kind of envying Airbnb because Airbnb could have bookings and rentals in any country, like very early in their journey, because insurance wasn't as a big of a barrier for Turo. But then, yeah, like that's definitely the first lesson I learned is like, yeah, don't only think about product. It is about operations. It is about like the offline. The atoms are a lot harder than the bits when it comes to international expansion.
Yeah, I think that may that may be true for uh, many other use cases and strategies as well, where atoms are harder than bits.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I plan to interview a few hardware startups founders in the next month or so. So we're going to be diving into that topic. Most of the startups that we speak to here, that we feature here on the podcast, has been on the software side. Very different, just different journey, different challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what is your grand vision for Tint? Fast forward 5 years or even 10 years out. What does Tint look like?
5 to 10 years, we power embedded like most companies doing embedded insurance, which will be the biggest part of insurance, right? For us, this what embedded insurance is a complete transformation of the insurance industry. Like now, if you think about the world where Turo's, Airbnb's, Uber are your insurers, or at the minimum your main point of contact with insurance, the value chain completely changes. The roles of who does what, who is going to get paid when, completely change. What technology they need behind the scenes completely change. So our vision is that like we will power that revolution, and we will be the de facto infrastructure and software that will be behind all of that. So I don't see a reason why in 10 years we don't have 50, $100 billion in premium running through our platform, which is the size roughly what Lloyd's of London is today.
Amazing. What about health insurance, life insurance, disability? Is that a category you plan to get into?
Not now. I think we believe there's more than enough to get ourselves busy within the property and casualty space. So damage related to things, to stuff that can break or that can hurt somebody else. We believe in that realm. There's a lot to be done. So we're today now looking at health, life, and all this. Like never say never, depending on the size of how things go. But like yeah, that will I would say it's probably beyond 10 years to get,
It's enough to keep you busy for the time being with liability and casualty property insurance.
that's right.
Makes sense. What about this? May be a strange question, but product warranties, in my mind, are somewhat similar to insurance. I know that they are. I guess maybe they do fall under property insurance. Is that a category that you guys have thought about offering as well?
Yes, that a lot closer to our appetite and capabilities than say health, for example.
Okay, so I guess we'll stay tuned to see if that's a new offering from Tint. Let's move on to our exciting lightning round. I'll ask you a few questions. Let me know first thing that comes to your mind. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. What's one book, podcast, or newsletter that you find yourself recommending most often?
0 to 1 from Peter Thiel. I think it's very good for founders.
Awesome. Yeah, I've got that next up on my reading list. So looking forward to that one. Um, what's happening now in the startup scene in Brazil? I know that's where you're from, but you're currently in the Bay Area. You relocated before starting Tint. What's happening there? Are you involved at all? Give us a glimpse into that.
A lot is happening. I'm not involved. I have some of my best friends who are founders there and very successful. So there's definitely a lot happening. One example is the neobanks, right? New bank. It's bigger than any neobank in the US, so more successful than, despite the different in economies. But I have not been involved since I left. So maybe I should, but I have not been.
But you do go back to visit, though.
I go back to visit twice a year, but typically I spend time with my family and on Zoom the entire time. So I don't do much in the local ecosystem.
Got it. Okay. What's a terrible piece of advice that you've received?
Terrible piece of advice that I received is to try to get free pilots to customers. Don't charge, right? Don't charge for pilots or whatever. Bad advice. Like at the end of the day, even if you charge $2,000 or something like relatively low for a B2B company, it triggers so many conversations that are extremely impactful and unveil if the prospect is actually serious about it. So always charge from the first pilot and customers you do. That will help a lot.
Fantastic. Yeah. Don't offer free pilots. I like that. Who's a mentor of yours that's had the most impact on your life or career?
I believe it's Andre Haddad, the CEO of Turo. He was my manager for most of my time. So I learned a lot about management and leadership from him. He was our first check at Turo. Sorry, at Tint. Sorry, he was our first check at Tint, and he continues to be a mentor, a big fan of the company. So yeah, I think it's him.
Amazing. And what's one core value or principle that you try to live your life by?
A core value, transparency. I think that a lot that especially in startups, relationships, that's a lot. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of discussion and conversations need to be have. And I think if you don't have transparency, then it's hard to kind of be good at it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Matheus, I absolutely love this. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights with us. Any final words of advice you'd like to share with the audience, and how can people reach you if they want to continue the conversation?
Yeah, last piece of advice again. I posted on LinkedIn lately a repost from Y Combinator, like determination, grit. It's really the most important thing for founders. It's hard. You're not alone. It always gets harder, I guess, as you go. But being on it, kind of developing the muscles to just keep going, it's really the most important factor. So work on that early on. I can be found on LinkedIn. It's the easiest way to find me. So if you search my name, I'm probably the only Matheus Riolfi out there. So you find me, but it's easy to just message me and we can continue the conversation from there.
Fantastic. I'll put that link in the show notes as always. Thank you, Matheus. Wishing you tons of success with Tint and with everything else, and hope to stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Moshe. It was a pleasure speaking with you.